Hello, everybody. I hope you've got your coffee ready for today's Power Talk, as both me and my guest today share a passion for this drink. Thank you for tuning in for the fourth episode of Success Snaps. It's a series of talks between friends. We try to be mindful with each other about different paths in life. So, why is today so special? I've got another person with me that I appreciate deeply, and he's probably one of the fastest learners that I've ever seen, honestly, and our paths happen to cross multiple times in our lives, in very funny ways actually. So I remain at awe when I think of his resilience, of his capacity to understand the world, and his overall really uplifting personality. So joining me today and next week is Andreas Zimmermann, and we'll start off light by discussing our experience going to uni in the UK and how you adapted to the situation, and then we're just gonna continue strong by discussing the state of the energy market right now, the energy storage solutions, his PhD, and obviously everybody's favorite, Tesla. This is gonna be a really intense episode, so join me today in introducing my friend Andreas. So, for the people who don't know you and what you're doing, can you please share with us some more details about your experience as a human and your experience at uni, and how is life going in general?
Okay, so I'll just start with a bit of intro about myself. My name is Andreas. I was born in Botoșani, which is a very small city in Romania. And I grew up there. And then after I finished high school, I decided to go and study in the UK. At the moment when I applied for uni, my dream was to study at Oxford. And at the moment, I can't really tell a particular reason for that. It was just, it sounded so good in my mind that I just wanted to get there. Unfortunately, I got rejected there. So the next choice was Southampton. And generally from this experience, I can say that I learned how to be resilient and just not be attached to a certain idea, be able to adapt. So I just went to Southampton, which in the end, it proved to be a very good choice overall. And I decided to study mechanical engineering here. And mainly that's how I met Victor.
So just to jump in really quick, actually I've had the same experience. So I also applied to Oxford and I got rejected, and I had Southampton as a second option as well. And it got really interesting because I think we wanted to go to Oxford because of the stories that we've been told. We were supposed to get to the place which was maybe, if you're thinking of academically, on our subjects, Southampton was actually better at the time. I think it was more about the reputation of Oxford more than anything else, right? But eventually what we went through, I think it was an incredibly useful course because it taught us how to think and how to adapt. And it's a very interesting notion that intelligence is actually the capability of holding two notions which are opposed in your head at the same time without going insane. So that's how the degree felt for me. You had to accept different points of views, right? Because we were also studying some general engineering facts, but then we both went in depth in certain fields. You obviously going for the mechanical one, and I going for the civil one. I remembered our first year being mostly similar, but after that, our experience was dramatically different. So if you can please go back to the idea of your degree and your experience through that degree so that our listeners can learn more of it and the differences between those two degrees.
Absolutely. So I can tell I can relate to what you just said. Certainly there are a lot of modules you're doing there, and from different kind of fields, especially in mechanical engineering. I later found out that mechanical engineering refers to sort of a general engineering. So you're not an expert in any kind of field, but you know a bit of pretty much everything. So looking back at the modules I did, they ranged from mechanics, materials, things like heat transfer, fluid mechanics, and even going into electronics. We even did the design of aerofoil for aeroplanes. And in my last year, I also took quite a lot of modules on automotive. That was my main subject or theme of the degree. So I can certainly relate to that. We had quite a broad experience of every field in engineering. But at the same time, I can't really say we got out of uni as proper experts of a certain field. We were a kind of jack of all trades, if you know that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what I find really interesting on this topic? Even if you feel like you're not an expert on all of the sides, like, I don't think that people have a good grasp of what engineering degrees are, and people are being pushed towards STEM degrees a lot recently. And, well, by all means, go in a STEM degree, even if you're not going in the same industry. You know, the thing that I chose to do, it teaches you a new way of thinking, and you learn how to solve really complex issues and problems. And these degrees are more about how you think than becoming a specialist. Because
absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I know what you did afterwards. So as you were saying, I believe you became an expert during your master's or in the following years?
Right. So although I can't really think of myself as an expert yet, and I'm still working towards being one. Currently, my field is in energy storage, and even if it's a very broad field, if you think about that, I got into it firstly in my first year. So I was very lucky. It was towards the end of the year. I was very lucky to get into a project sponsored by the British Council, and it basically involved three of us going to a university in China. It was in Chongqing, and we were supposed to stay there for about 2 weeks and a half and just work with some Chinese students. They were studying industrial design. We were engineers. And the goal was to come up with a design of a new energy car. And if you think about that, it's generally electric vehicle. But it turned out that the project I was involved in was anything but that. So it was extremely difficult to just work together with those students. Brilliant people otherwise, but quite difficult to communicate with them. And it took us a while to actually realize that we were the technical minds in the teams, and they were the aesthetic. They were looking at the aesthetic aspect of the car. And also they were studying how you integrate the interface of the car with the user. And I was there to think about how to design a powertrain for the vehicle, and how what kind of energy can use, how can it be more efficient, more practical, and so on. And initially we started with the idea of an electric vehicle, but you know how it happens in teams, that nothing really goes as planned. There are delays, there are changes of direction, so you go in different, you change your project as you go.
Yeah, especially if you don't have a fixed outcome, you change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just there about 2 days before the final deadline of the project, and I found out that my team wanted me to explain how a nuclear car works. And you can imagine my jaw just went down. How am I supposed to do that?
You have to become an expert overnight, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, it was quite interesting to find info about that. As it turns out, there was actually a prototype of a nuclear car that was proposed a few years back, and it was supposing heating up water and turning it in. It's basically just like a nuclear thermal station works. And as one of my lecturers once said, Nuclear power stations are just a fancy way of heating up water. And because that's essentially what you're doing. You're using nuclear power to heat up water, turn it into steam, and then turn a turbine. So that car was working in this kind of way.
And we're so scared of this energy that we don't understand. I mean, we don't even want to listen about how it works, right? Because people are thinking, hey, this is dangerous. It's not. I mean, it's way safer than many other ways of producing energy. But yeah, I'm not going to go way too deep into that. I just wanted to add this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Contrary to the public opinion, indeed, nuclear power is very environmentally friendly. As it's being operated, it's more difficult to dispose of the nuclear material after you use it. But it's just an entire subject here, quite difficult to cover. Anyway, so just going back to what I was saying, this project sparked my interest in electric vehicles. So following that, together with my colleagues who went with me in China, we started an electric vehicle society here in Southampton. So essentially, to do that, you need to get the interest of at least 20 people and get them to sign. We managed to do that. So here we were in my third year, which turned out to be my last undergraduate year. So we started this electric vehicle society, and initially we thought of it just like a way of gathering people and talk about new developments in electric vehicles, or just go to factories and see what's that about and so on. But then there was this opportunity of going into the Shell Eco Marathon, and for whoever is not familiar with that, Shell Eco Marathon is a competition of designing and building very energy efficient cars. And this was for the first time in London. It was in 2016. Yeah. So we started with this goal of, although a very ambitious goal, I can say. We wanted to entirely design and build a car from scratch that would go in this competition. And those cars are really funny if you look at them. They look just like coffins on wheels. You sit in them, you just lay flat. And they're really small. And what attracted us into this, as opposed to things like Formula Student, was that the regulations were much lighter. So in Formula Student, you have like hundreds of pages of regulations and all that sort. Whereas in Eco Marathon, it just seemed to be more like a set of guidelines for building the car. Nothing too strict. So we just went on with that. I chose my individual project, which is essentially the dissertation in the third year. I chose that to be the design of the powertrain of the car. And I just went on with that. In the end, we managed, and by we, I say we, but it's mostly the guys in the team. As it turned out, in the same year, I had the wedding. So it just suddenly became a very busy year for me. So the guys, and I'll just mention a few names. It's Diogo, Michael, Stefano, and also a lot of help from Robert and Adrian. They managed to get this car working. They went in London and they passed all the technical tests, it's a fantastic milestone if you think about that. We managed to put together a car in less than a year, and it was fairly functional. So it was a great experience overall.
So I just want to go a bit back on the story. So first of all, congratulations on the wedding. The second thing, well, you know what's actually really important to get out of it? You went where your interest was. So despite having all of those modules, you're like, hey, you know what? You found people who had the same mindset as you, because I remember we were talking quite often about that. And I know that the whole electric vehicle community was non-existent at the time you started the uni there. So you basically, all of you built that society there. And see, it was very interesting because basically all of you decided that, hey, we have this common hobby, so how about we can do something extra? So it's all about going a bit, it's a cliche, right? But going the extra mile if you find something that interests you, because I think that also shaped, your future. And as you're saying, it shaped your dissertation, right? So basically it shaped how the uni ended for you. So I think it was really interesting that you figured out, hey, I want to do this despite the fact that nobody else did it before. So the whole fact that you also went to a competition, anything else, honestly, from that point, it was a bonus, right? Because it was just interesting to learn those things on your own. And, you choosing to go to this competition. I mean, if you went to the formula competition, again, I think the knowledge required for that, it's roughly the same, right? So this wasn't about the outcome as much as the journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's at least how it sounded, right? Yeah, it's interesting because now, if you want to give us like 2 or 3 ideas on your PhD, it's still related to that field, right? So you followed basically the same interest during the PhD as well.
Yeah, exactly. So as you said, I found really a subject that sounded interesting to me, and I just went on and pursued it. And then it turned out there was this nice opportunity of doing a PhD. And I was anything but interested in doing a PhD while I was in my undergrad. My initial plan was just to finish my Masters of Engineering, which was it was an integrated course with 4 years.
Right.
But in the end, there was this PhD opportunity, and what was particularly interesting about that, it had this year of training. So it's not just a normal PhD, which takes 3 years and it's only research. It had this first year, which is exactly is structured basically like a master's year.
Okay.
So instead of doing my master's, my MEng, is the final year in the master's, I decided to take this PhD. So I did my first year of training, which taught us about batteries. Or not batteries. I'm saying batteries. It's not just that. Energy storage in general, mainly. Including the way energy works around the globe. Why do we need energy storage? What types of energy storage are out there? And so on. And after I finished this first year of training, which is just like an MSc really, I embarked on my actual PhD, which is a research component. And this takes 3 years in the UK. In other countries, it might take a bit longer. I know in the US, you can even go up to 6-7 years in a PhD. And at the moment, I'm at the middle of my... so I'm about halfway through into my research component.
Right. And I don't want to get into a debate or discussion on the merits of the UK education system against, let's say, the Romanian education system, because that's the system that we've been through all the way through and including high school as well. I just wanted to mention that during this discussion, you and me both, we were saying that we felt that our degrees were general. Yeah, but when people are hearing this, they're going to think, oh, it means they were learning about geography and other subjects. No. It was general in the sense of both of us tend to be and to, strive, I would say, in environments which are really focused on one thing. And see, for example, for me, I strived when I was doing my dissertation as well on the global demand for high-speed rail. I mean, that was just economics of high-speed trains, right? So that was just a small part. And that was the thing that interested me. I wasn't interested in the geotechnics of the railways. Like, I didn't need to know how the trucks would get installed because I had no interest in never doing that. Like, please just don't go with me on a construction site and tell me how to place the rail, because that bores me to death, right? I had certain interests. So when people are hearing that we say that even the masters was general, it was general, but in the field it's still
absolutely.
Exactly. It's still very important to point that out, because once you get to know the field well enough, then you can further go into a PhD and to understand if there is anything in that field that interests you, because a field has so many subfields. Like it's insane. Like you can do, if for example, if you're a mechanical, civil or aero engineer, you can do so many different things. Like they don't even relate to each other, and it's crazy. But on the topic of this, I believe that, and I just want to very briefly touch on this. What helped you during the transition to the life in UK? Was the family playing a large role, or how did you feel like you adapted to the system and all that? I'm just gonna briefly mention this. So.
Right. So here I feel there was a combination of factors, if I would say that. First of all, nothing would have been possible without my family. And mainly here I'm talking about the emotional support. So during my life, they really taught me how to take care of myself, how to be a correct person, how to, all those really important values in adulthood. Then there was my then girlfriend, now wife. And I could really have someone to talk to during, more difficult times. And it's difficult to just go out, 18 years old, go out of your city, go in a completely new country, new culture, and all that. And sometimes it could have got, or sometimes it was a bit difficult, but having the support of family and friends was really important. And then the second thing is the financial support.
Okay.
So I know people who just came here and they did really well for themselves without any kind of financial support, but that meant getting a job and splitting your focus between your studies and work and all that. And it was indeed more difficult. And in my second year, I actually took a part-time job. It wasn't too much about, or it wasn't at all about financial, or about the financial aspect. It was more about getting some experience and somehow blending in the society more, learning how. And
it was something that interested you as well, right? So.
Yeah, it was an interesting job. So I was working in a repair shop, and I was all day tinkering with small devices like smartphones, tablets, and all that. It was a way for me to see how the society is outside the university, because generally in universities you find very mixed communities of international students, local students. It's generally a good mix of that. And also if you're looking at the way lecturers speak, it's more easy to understand that. Generally a more tolerant environment. But in the society, it's not always the case. There are slight differences here and there. So I wanted to just get a taste of this. And I did that for 2 years. So during my second and third year.
Plenty of experience.
Absolutely, yeah. It was customer service, quite a lot of it. And I stand by the idea that everyone in their lifetime should work at some point in either in customer service, retail, or catering. Because in that way you learn to appreciate the work these people do, and you learn how to treat them with respect, as you should treat any kind of person.
I agree with that. And I mean, the fact that we need this, it's quite annoying, because we should know this just through our own values. because as you're saying, it's really important to have some proper values that you can share them and discuss them with the world, and you can act in accordance with those values afterwards. But I remember that after you finished that, we had some talks. You were already starting with a PhD, and we were thinking and we were talking about different things that we can do in the energy related fields, and it's a fascinating subject, and I think you have really deep knowledge of it. So if you'd like to talk a bit about your beliefs about the current state and the future state of the energy storage space, because I don't think that many people have a good understanding of it, so I think it's gonna be like really useful to hear everything from you.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. So in the energy sector, we can currently see a large transition from conventional generation, which is the one based on fossil fuels. We see less and less coal, but still we're quite reliant on gas, and also oil or oil as in petrol and diesel for our transportation. So we're in a transition from this conventional way of generating energy to a more sustainable and renewable one. Obviously, we have limited resources of fossil fuels, and I've heard different opinions on that. Some say that we'll run out of fossil fuels completely in like 50 years. Some say that it will last for longer than 1,000 years, so we don't have to worry. Again, we need to be very critical of any kind of information we take from the media in general,
and to see their sources.
Yeah, especially in our days. But anyways, this kind of trend can be seen on a large scale. We see it everywhere around us. And now there's a lot of hype, and maybe it's a harsh word, hype, but it's really a lot of interest in solar panels and wind turbines, as well as other methods of using biofuels, biodiesel, if you heard about that, biogases, and so on. And this transition is or can be sustained, or let me think of how to put this in an easy to understand manner. So in order to implement renewable generation on a large scale, we need energy storage. And this is because renewable generation can't really provide the energy we need when we need it. It doesn't follow a demand profile. So generally the supply and the demand are quite unrelated or unlinked in renewable energy. Whereas in conventional generation, you can just ramp up the generators by putting in more fuel, and you just you provide enough energy for the demand. In renewables, if you think, you can get sunny days, you can get cloudy days, and then it's difficult to have a really reliable source of energy. So in this sense, we really need energy storage, so we can fill in those gaps, really. Whenever
it's the fluctuations.
Exactly. So whenever, for instance, at night we have a very low demand, but we can have wind turbines spinning at their maximum speed and generating the maximum power. We don't need that energy. And if we don't use it when it's generated, and if we don't store it for later, it's just being lost. So essentially, that's the reason we need energy storage. And with this, I'm talking mainly in large-scale grid systems. And obviously, we need energy storage in many other applications, such as electric vehicles, because we don't really want to have our vehicles plugged in while we're going. So.
And we want a larger autonomy, right? We want to be able to go more than 200 kilometers to wherever.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to say about energy in general, and I'm just going back here,
Sure.
I used to think of energy as I took it for granted. So I thought, it's something we can master, something we can produce easily, we can control, we can have it whenever. But this is not really true in many parts of the world. And also I realized that energy is actually much more important than I thought it was. Because it's essentially at the core of any kind of activity we're doing, and at the core of life generally. So this concept was introduced in a really interesting book. It's called Energy and Civilization by Vaclav Smil. But just going on with that, an interesting fact about energy storage, as we're talking about that. Many people, when you tell them about energy storage, they think about batteries. And while this is really true in consumer devices and electric vehicles, if you're looking at electricity grids, 99% of the total energy storage capacity in the world is actually from pumped hydro energy storage.
Yeah.
And this concept actually requires you to have a reservoir of water somewhere at a considerable height. So essentially you just pump that water in the reservoir whenever you don't need energy. And whenever you need energy, you just drop that water and it flows through a turbine, spinning it and generating energy. It's quite a simple way of storing energy. But it's surprisingly, it's 99% of the whole capacity.
Actually, it's my favorite one as well. So
yeah. And it's also environmentally friendly, so more or less. Let's not get into details here.
If you're thinking of it, and I'm just gonna interrupt for just 1 second. So you've got the hydropower, which is like, at the moment, it's the cleanest way if you disregard the carbon print of the plant in itself, right? Because for that to happen, and obviously the effect that it has on the river itself, but there are people who are trying to limit these effects as much as possible. But obviously, there can be, you can go either way with this one. But in terms of solar, again, you have some costs of producing in terms of carbon as well, right?
Yeah.
And it's also not only the solar panels that people don't see, it's also the massive plants that they're needed in order for those solar panels to do something. Because solar energy is not about your house having some solar panels on it and that's it. No, because you need it at such big scale, then it's quite tough to wrap your mind around it in order to be effective. And
absolutely.
I remember studying this while I was in uni, and the efficiency of the panels, it's abysmal.
At the moment, I think the best efficiency they got up to was just about 20%. I know it's under 25% as well. So it's pretty low. In terms of hydropower is incredibly, it's gonna sound weird, but it's incredibly powerful in terms of what you can extract from it. But again, if we cannot store the whole energy, then it's just lost, right? And there is another issue with it, is the issue of geography, and the other issue of politics, because if you want to have a hydro plant, well, I don't think there are any hydro plants which are not decided by the government. So you need some sort of approval,
from the government in order to build something, because that affects the flow of the river, right? So you definitely need
the whole idea of building a hydropower plant is fairly complex, and it can attract supporters and people that are not really agreeing with that from both camps. It could be a costly thing to implement, and also it has some impact on the environment around. But also there are people that just don't agree with that as a concept. And the same thing happens with wind turbines. If you're going on this more novel renewable energy. There's an interesting concept which we came across during my master's year. It's called NIMBY. NIMBY comes from not in my backyard. So
Okay.
it's essentially people not agreeing to having wind turbines close to their homes because of different reasons, such as they don't look nice, they disturb the environment, they're noisy, and so on. And it's essentially people that agree with the concept of renewable energy. They support it fully, but they say, okay, just build it, but not in my backyard. Build it somewhere else.
It's very funny because in psychology there is this effect, which basically says that some people experience actual headaches and dizziness and all that crap when they come close to windmills, and it's like, how is this possible? But some people believe there is some sort of energy field around those that it's affecting them. It's the same as with Wi-Fi's, right? Some people believe that Wi-Fi's cause headaches or whatever, and if they believe that, they're going to have the headaches.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though the Wi-Fi has nothing to do with the body on itself.
I think this is called also the power of suggestion.
I think it's a bit more than that, but I can't remember the term of it, but I remember reading about it, and it was just crazy. And people actually feel like they have some sort of disease, which is not true, but I completely understand that. And on the idea of battery storage, so what would you say what would you say would be the state right now of the energy storage? How are the batteries? Is there room for improvement? Because I also want to talk a bit later. Maybe you can start on this topic as well. I want to also go into the whole topic of Tesla, because it's a buzzword right now and a company with lots of hype, but actually it brings the whole discussion to the front of media, and I think that's really powerful. And I'm actually really interested in their plan. Basically, they're trying to control the whole energy grid of the US. They're trying to become the main supplier of energy, because that's the end game of Tesla. The end game is not to sell. Selling cars, that's actually interesting as well for Elon Musk, but controlling the energy, that's a way bigger game.
That's on another level.
Exactly. So
you're right.
If you could please share some ideas on the state of batteries, and then we're gonna move into this one.
Okay, so as we call it in research, this is the state of the art in energy storage. So, as I said, 99% is pumped hydro, but batteries are catching up. And at the moment, although I'm not an expert in batteries, my project focuses on something else, and I'll get into a bit more detail a bit later. But essentially, batteries nowadays, the main technology is lithium-ion. You see lithium-ion pretty much everywhere, and indeed they are very efficient. Their energy density is fairly high. It's really the benchmark now. It's setting the upper kind of value for energy density, and that's why they're used so largely in mobile applications and also in electric vehicles. But there are also lithium-ion batteries in the grid, even if they're a bit more expensive. Until now, the main kind of technology or battery technology used in grids was lead acid, but since lead is not fantastically friendly element, they're kind of trying to steer away from it. So I also saw attempts to combine lead acid and lithium ion, only because lead acid is about 3 times less expensive than lithium ion. Also, another thing which is interesting now, they're trying to use second life batteries, and to this I refer, or through this I refer to the batteries that have been used in applications such as electric vehicles. Once a battery reaches 80% of its total charge capacity, it's deemed as not safe for electric vehicles. So from that point, those batteries are still working, they're still fine, but they're not really safe for electric vehicles, so they're taking them and putting them in grid applications, for instance. That's in terms of batteries. Some other novel chemistries, they're looking at metal air batteries. These are very interesting because generally in batteries you have two electrodes. In metal air batteries, one of the electrodes is the air surrounding it. So you essentially have just one electrode of mainly a metal. I've seen aluminium air, zinc air, and so on.
Right.
This is in terms of batteries, but what's also interesting in energy storage, you have two types of storage. You have the high energy. So these are devices that can store energy for a long period of time and just discharge over a few hours or even days. So on the other side, there's high power energy storage, and this is essentially for discharging very quickly. They are devices that can sustain the grid. So whenever there's a voltage drop or a frequency mismatch, these devices can inject or absorb power from the grid in order to make it more stable. And my PhD project focuses on one of these kind of devices, and it's called superconducting magnetic energy storage, and it's based on applications of superconductors. But on another application here or another storage technology here is the supercapacitor. And I'm pretty sure most of your listeners have at least heard about capacitors or supercapacitors. So these devices have been used in electric vehicles as a hybrid with batteries. So here the batteries provide energy for the whole duration of or for a longer period, while supercapacitors can discharge very quickly and help the battery while the vehicle is accelerating from a standstill. So here it cuts the whole load on the battery, or it reduces it quite significantly, and therefore it can increase the lifetime of the battery.
So it's more about the wear of the battery, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like a support for the battery. Okay. And this is what I would say is the state of the art at the moment. So they're trying to make lithium-ion batteries more, efficient with larger energy densities. But obviously, there's a physical limitation to this. They're trying to make them more safe, mainly because they suffer from this thing called thermal runaway, which happens whenever one cell gets very hot. So lithium-ion batteries are very sensitive to high voltages or high temperatures. On the other side, I also heard about solid-state batteries, also based on lithium-ion, but with another kind of electrolyte. Again, not going into too much detail here.
On the side to cover everything.
Yeah. On the side of high-power devices, it's just trying to integrate supercapacitors in whichever applications would require high-power discharge. And in this way, you can preserve the lifetime of lithium-ion batteries, which, anyways, their lifetime isn't very, very long. It's only about 2,000 cycles. So if you think in terms of days of usage, if you use the battery fully every day, 2,000 cycles is just barely 5 years, around that.
And this is basically the point of failure of so many applications, such as, for example, if you're thinking of an electric airplane, because they've been trying to do this at Airbus, but the batteries are the point of failure, because the more batteries you get, also there is the topic of weight, right? So in an airplane, that's really sensitive. In a car, it can get sensitive as well. But I think the new companies, well, Tesla started this. It's obviously not the only one. I believe there are at least 5 or 6 really good competitors for them only in the niche, but there are also the big ones such as BMW or whatever, which started investing so much money into this research, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always the risk, if you increase the battery size, let's say, you're increasing its weight, right? So there is always a trade-off to be had.
That's the reason they're trying to maximize the energy density. So ideally, you want to keep pretty much the same weight, but increase the amount of energy stored in the battery. So you increase the range. Indeed. In Teslas, I believe the battery weighs over 500 kilos, which is quite a significant weight for a normal passenger car. If you think most of cars nowadays, they weigh maybe around 1,500 kilos, and adding a battery of 500 kilos, it's quite significant. Obviously, you offset this with the weight of an engine, the fuel tank, and so on. So in the end, it's maybe just slightly more heavy or heavier.
There are also advantages to an electric engine, like the sharpness of an electric engine you cannot replicate with a normal, with a diesel one, let's say. But it's in the way they deliver torque. So in a standard internal combustion engine, the torque only the torque reaches its peak after a certain RPM. Typically in diesel engines, you'll see something around 1,500 to 2,000 RPM, where they reach their peak torque. In petrol, it's even higher than that. It's maybe 3,000 RPM. Whereas in electric vehicles, it's just instantaneous. As the car starts, it reaches its peak torque. And I can tell, so I've been in a Tesla, and we went for about 200 kilometers, which is quite a significant distance. And I can say the feeling you get when you accelerate in a Tesla is just unbelievable. The kind of torque, and also the fact that it's very silent. So generally in cars, in internal combustion cars, when you start from standstill, you accelerate, they get noisier and noisier. Yeah, but obviously. Then in Tesla, it's just a sense of eerie. It's just like being taken by some invisible force. I know this sounds weird, but that's how you feel. You don't feel like you're accelerating. You just feel like you're floating. Yeah, because that's the thing. They work in completely different ways, like the engines, right? Yeah. You cannot really compare one to the other. But I think it's just very interesting to note where Tesla started, let's say 10 years ago, and how things evolved. Tesla, I think they first started with the Roadster, which was, if I'm not wrong, around 2005-ish. Could be a bit later than that, I'm not really sure. I remember it was really expensive. It was extremely expensive and not a very practical car. It was based on a Lotus. But it was fun. It seemed a very fun to drive car. And then they went on with the Model 3, which is a much more practical car. Nowadays, it's really the benchmark for electric vehicles, passenger or normal electric vehicles, because we also have that side of Rimac. Rimac being the Croatian. Yeah, they're Croatian. Are they Croatian? They are Croatian. Right. Yeah. Where they're doing really high performance hypercars, and there was also a new one now in Geneva, not from Rimac, another company, but the figures were just incredible. Power output of 1900 horsepower,
and an acceleration of 1.9 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. This is just insane. So
I agree.
We can clearly see we're going in a very interesting direction with electric vehicles, and there's no way we can clearly see that Tesla was a pioneer here, as in modern day electric vehicles.
And I think they didn't think of creating this whole electric vehicle space just for that. I think it's also nested with their ideas of creating the power wall, with the idea of creating the tiles and everything else around the house. So basically, I think it's more like creating a whole environment than just creating a car. So I think they also have to integrate this somehow with IoT, and there are definitely plans for that, because you can have like a home fully functional on Tesla solutions, powered by Tesla solutions, and then you're just living your home through a Tesla powered vehicle, more or less, right? Even if it's Tesla or not, because we were talking about this and how maybe it's not easy to charge different cars at the Tesla superchargers, but still the fact that there is the possibility of having a supercharger close to your home, obviously in the US, not in Europe, but in the US, I mean, they're moving towards this, and the power plants that Tesla created, I mean, it's pretty impressive, to say the least.
And in this sense, it's very difficult to specifically say what kind of company Tesla is, because you can't really say it's an automotive company. You can't really say it's a battery company. It's more like a technology company that has most of its applications in energy, or you can say it's an energy company. But the point here is that indeed they seem to be going towards a model of a whole energy system solution. We saw they're able to deliver a very large-scale battery as the one in Australia, and that one is at the moment the largest grid-scale battery in the world. It's 100 megawatt and 129 megawatt hour, and this is only made using Tesla Powerwalls. So it's just a very nice example of how this technology can scale up, and it can be implemented in really any kind of application, not only for houses, but also if you're thinking about this model of microgrid, where you have co-location of renewables, storage, and loads. It's essentially like a very small island, which is independent of the large grid. So you can, if you're thinking about that, you can just easily put some Tesla Powerwalls in there and supply enough energy storage for that small microgrid. So in this sense, it's very interesting the way they're going into. At the same time, I can imagine they have competition. And I've seen some companies, including Moixa in the UK, and I'm pretty sure there are some others around the world. Also, another thing that was very interesting to mention was the way of or the possibility of using your Tesla battery to power your home. And this is not only done by Tesla. I saw this in Nissan as well. This concept is derived from the idea of vehicle to grid. So in this vehicle to grid thing, you can imagine that at any time you have a lot of electric vehicles parked. So you may think, why do we not use their batteries to support the grid? Instead of just investing more and just commissioning other large-scale battery systems, we can just simply use the batteries installed in those parked cars.
Yeah, but wouldn't that mean they get worn out really faster?
It depends. Batteries get worn out when they're not used in their nominal parameters. So whenever you discharge them too much, so in a lithium-ion battery, their optimal range is between 20% and 80% state of charge. If you go beyond that, if you overcharge the battery over 80% or discharge it more than or less than 20%, it just gets worn out quicker. There are, this concept of vehicle to grid hasn't been implemented officially in a large scale application. Not as far as I know. It's still a concept, yeah. But the thing here is that you can control this power flow. So indeed, you need some power from those car batteries. You won't take it in a way that it affects the battery. There's an aggregator that gives instructions to every battery, and it just tells it how much you can discharge. So just going back to that, you can simply have an electric vehicle plugged into your house, and you can use this to support the consumers in the house without actually consuming anything from the grid.
Just by thinking, that's not really terribly difficult to do, because there are ways of doing this through limitations. They can either be physical limitations or some sort of software.
Yeah.
Like all of our laptops right now have the weird software that limits, like, even though they're saying we're using 100% of our batteries, we're not. We can never go over 90%, because that's again another measure, because as you were saying, if you deplete it way too much, you're gonna have an issue. Exactly. Also, there is still the problem of overcharging, and that's something that I believe we could do a bit better in terms of, at some point, if you get a charger which is smart, at some point it should just cut the power supply, but that should be something that gets implemented rather sooner than later, because it's pretty easy to overcharge things. It is, especially, if I have a car, I want to make sure that I'm hitting the full range, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna leave it overnight or whatnot, and if I do that way too many times, the wear on the battery, it's gonna decrease really fast.
And also here, there's another idea that I can't see too much mentioning of. It's the rate of charge of the battery. So they keep selling electric vehicles, saying that this vehicle will charge 80% in half an hour, or 200 miles in I don't know how many minutes, and so on. This is called fast charging, and fast charging in batteries means forcing them to charge quicker than they should. And this, in the long run, it reduces their lifetime. And I haven't seen any manufacturer mentioning this or stating this loud and clearly. It's just something you could probably find in the fine print. Don't supercharge or don't quick charge your car too many times, because that and this.
So, beautiful people, this is the end of the first episode with Andy. I'm gonna have him as a guest the next week as well, and we're gonna speak about productivity and what it means to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, and how he found a certain balance and a certain structure in his world and in his life. And I'm hoping you really enjoyed this talk, because we covered so many subjects that I believe are completely insane and interesting, from our stories of uni in general and the degrees, to how he got to his PhD and how he eventually ended up in a field that he absolutely enjoys because he followed his interest. I think those are some key points that I got from Andy's stories. Also, we had some really good discussion, and actually Andy had some really good points about energy storage, and I was actually more interested in hearing him talk about it because he has lots of knowledge on this subject. So I just thought, hey, maybe this can be useful for any of us that's listening to him, and for that I'm so thankful that he agreed to speak about basically what he learned in the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm gonna be saying goodbye for now, but thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, and whatever you do. It's been great. Again, if at least one person finds this of value, me and Andy both, we were actually discussing this, would be thankful if one person would feel like, hey, maybe that's a field that I'm interested in, because that's what it's all about. It's about sharing what we went through and discussing what we believe can help you. So thank you for your attention. We're not taking this for granted, and I promise you the next week is gonna be even more intense. It's gonna be a shorter one, and it's gonna be fully packed with goodness and with actionable tips. So until then, it's been a massive pleasure. I'm Victor here, and I'm signing out.